In the first 4 chapters of the book of Joshua, we learned 4 very important things. In chapter 1, we learned that we were given encouragement to begin a new beginning. God encourages us to start on this path into the promised land. In chapter 2, we learned that there were 4 types of faith that we needed to make it into the promised land. In chapter 3, we learned what we need to do to get ready to enter the promised land. And last week in chapter 4, we learned what to do on our way into the promised land. Today, we're going to learn what to do to be ready for the battle. What do we need to do to be ready for the battle? Now, the 5th chapter of Joshua is a very curious chapter. Some interesting things happen there. And I want to look at them very carefully because I think we can get distracted if we're not paying attention. So look at what it says in Joshua 5. At that time, I think this is verse 2, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. I'm sure that the Israelite boys and girls and men especially were asking, are you serious? Now, I think it's important that we have a little bit of history to go along with this. When the slaves fled Egypt, they left everything and ran. And the entire 40 years that they were in the wilderness, none of the little boys were circumcised. You see, circumcision was a sign of the covenant between the Israelites and God. The Israelites promised to follow God's law, and God promised to bless them. And so on the 8th day, every little Jewish boy was circumcised. Now, for those of you who are medical professionals or who've had a lot of science classes, you might be interested to know that the vitamin or the material in the blood that helps blood clot is called prothrombin or vitamin K. And in the life cycle of the male human being, the day at which the level of prothrombin highest naturally occurring in the body is on the 8th day, and that's the day God asked them to circumcise the boys. A pretty amazing fact. And yet, while they were in the wilderness, they didn't circumcise the little boy Israelites for a couple of reasons. One, they were in the desert, not a very clean place to be doing surgery. And secondly, they were on the move, and things were different for them. And so circumcision had not been practiced for 40 years. You see, sometimes God asks the unbelievable. He's asking the unbelievable now. Yes. Okay, my computer just crashed. I'm going to fix that and talk at the same time. Let's see if we can do that. Come back. There we go. Thank you. Pretty unbelievable, huh? I don't know why it's doing that. Anyway, sometimes God asks us the unbelievable. I don't know about you, but in my life, there have been times when God has asked me to do things that are unbelievable. Move to Florida from California. Are you serious? I don't know about you, but unbelievable things are asked. And I know that for about half the people in the room, this situation of circumcising all of the men in Israel might seem kind of comical. But for the rest of us, this was a pretty serious thing. Are you serious? You want to circumcise the whole nation with flint knives? Sometimes God asks us things that are unbelievable, but sometimes God has to. You see, when the Israelites fled Egypt, it wasn't very long before they messed up. You see, God had sent them the manna from heaven. God had opened up the Red Sea so that they could escape the Egyptians. God had given them a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of smoke during the day so that they would know which direction to go. And about the first thing they said was, well, you know, God's not with us anymore, so we should make a golden calf. Not the best idea. And because of their sin, God said to all of those who were involved in that process, you won't make it into the Holy Land, but your children will. You see, sometimes God has to do things. The problem with all of those Israelite men and women who had been enslaved their entire life was that they had a slave mentality. God needed to have a free people if He was going to start His nation. They had to not have any of the holdovers from Egypt. Sometimes God asks the unbelievable. Sometimes God has to. And the question is, okay, but why? I've stood up here on several occasions and told you, rarely does God answer the why question. This morning, God answers the why question. I know that many of you have been going through some unbelievable things. And you've asked God, are you serious? And you've always wondered why you are going through those things. This morning, I'm going to give you 4 different reasons why you're going through those things. And they come from chapter 5 of Joshua. Are you ready? You might want to write these down. First, God asks us the unbelievable because sometimes we need a wilderness experience. All the men of the military age died in the desert on the way after leaving Egypt. Sometimes we need a wilderness experience. Sometimes life needs to be lost and confusing and difficult for us so that we will figure some things out. Heck, even Jesus needed a wilderness experience. We read about it this morning. 40 days and nights in the wilderness without any food. Sometimes we need that wilderness experience because it clears some things out. Sometimes it's a clarifying experience. I don't know about you, but when I've gone through some very difficult times in my life, it's made my direction for the future much more clear. Sometimes we have to have tough times. My mom was famous for saying, if all you ever have is chocolate cake, you don't know how good it is. Sometimes you need some liver and onions. Do you know why you cook liver with onions and bacon? So that when you throw out the liver, you'll have something left to eat. But sometimes we need these wilderness experiences to strengthen us. We also sometimes need a cleansing experience. Since they had not obeyed the Lord, He raised up their sons in their place. There are churches that I have served where nothing positive has happened for decades. Sometimes God had to let the whole congregation die out before anything good could happen. I had a friend who is serving in a very difficult church situation. I talked to him a while back and I asked him how things are going. He said, well, they're getting better. I said, oh, how come? He said, well, we've had some very appropriately timed memorial services. Sometimes we need a cleansing experience. Sometimes God has to get the stuff out of our lives that has been holding us back. Sometimes we have to go through that difficult wilderness experience so that the bad things in our life can be identified and we can get rid of them. Sometimes we need a wilderness experience. Sometimes we need a cleansing experience. And sometimes we need a healing experience. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained there where they were in camp until they were healed. Whew. It's bad enough that you're going to circumcise us with flint knives. At least let us rest for a little while. Sometimes we need a healing time in our lives. It seems to me that anytime I've gone through a wilderness or a cleansing experience, that God always provides for me a little time of peace and quiet. Because we need that. Sometimes we need to just sit back and reflect, to take a vacation, to take a break, and to soak in all that God has for us so that we can heal. We often try to just charge right in and change things because we've got all the good ideas. You know, I was an interim pastor for 15 years. And in each interim I served, the first thing they asked me was, when are we getting our real pastor? Always made me feel just wonderful. But it's because people don't want to wait. They want to get right in and get going. The problem is that sometimes there are issues that the church needs to, all the time, there are the issues that the church needs to deal with. And there needed to be some time for healing. We've been through some difficult things in the past. And I know that God has given us a time of healing as a church. You've been through some difficult things on your own. Take the opportunity that God gives you to heal, not just physically, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Why does sometimes God ask us the unbelievable? Because we need a wilderness experience. We need a cleansing experience. We need a healing experience. And finally, we need a growing experience. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites. The wonderful thing about freedom is you're free. The terrible thing about freedom is that nobody takes care of you. Imagine if you had spent the last 40 years of your life having dinner fall magically from the sky for you every day, and then all of a sudden it stopped. Uh-oh. Gotta work now. You can insert your argument against welfare right here, but I'm not going to get into that kind of stuff. We have to be responsible when we are free. And sometimes God has to put us through a growing experience to help us understand that there are things that we have to do to earn our freedom. That we have to be responsible individuals. That God isn't just going to send us gifts from heaven. Oh, it would be wonderful if God gave us all $1 million and all a Porsche and we were all healthy all the time and everything was just wonderful every day of our whole lives. The problem is we would be about 1 mile wide and about 1/4 inch deep. We need to go through difficult times so that we can grow in our faith. It's important that we understand this because otherwise we always are upset with God because of all the stuff that's happened or is happening to us. Please understand that when you go through an unbelievable time in your life, it's because God is preparing you to enter the next phase, which will be the promised land. Understand that your wilderness experience or your cleansing experience or your healing experience or your growing experience are there for a reason. And that's to prepare you for the promised land. Now, the seminal verse in the first 5 chapters of the book of Joshua is at the end of this passage. He says, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." Translated into English, that means today I've gotten rid of all of the gunk in your past. Much of our problem these days is that we're so focused on the gunk in our past, we can't see the promised land that's before us. God has said to us, today I've removed all that stuff. If you're somebody who's gone through some difficult times and you're still moping around about them, today I have removed the reproach of Egypt from you, God says. Don't sit around having a pity party. Understand that the past is the past. God has gotten you through it. It's time to move forward. Amen. If we are to be God's children, then we need to realize the promise that God has offered us. He has a promised land waiting for us as individuals and as a church. We need to understand that the difficult stuff that we've gone through, or even that we're going through now, is preparing us for that next phase. And once we finish the phase and get over our pity party, we need to realize that God has gotten rid of all that stuff in our past. And it's time to move forward. Amen?